Today we have the most motivating person I just met 2 minutes ago. This is Carolina. She is the president of the
Autism Foundation in Aruba.
That's fine. Autism Foundation of Aruba, and the chairperson of the National Autism Committee, and she does it all in her free time. So, welcome.
Thank you. All right, welcome. So, if you have questions in Spanish, si tienen preguntas en español, I can answer those. But I will be presenting in English as that is my most comfortable language for this. So, who am I? Why I'm here, right? My name is Carolina Teal Span, and I am indeed the president of the Aruban Autism Foundation. And since recently, we have an official national committee on autism, and that's by mandate of the government. And I am the chairperson, being the chairperson of the foundation as well. My background is in health administration, so the way I view things is in healthcare. And I work as a policy advisor, so that's also a little bit of what I bring into the foundation and the work that I do. So, who are we as a foundation? Our mission is basically to advocate for the needs of people on the spectrum in Aruba and try to create systematic change so they can have happier lives. Just for context, in comparison to the countries that we have seen these in these presentations, Aruba is very, very small. And we have a population of about 120,000 people. It is part of the Dutch kingdom. So in context, it's very different to other Latin American countries, but culturally, it's very similar. So we have melting pots of people as well. And religiously, we are a Roman Catholic country. So in those regards, it's very important for us to find partners in the region that better match our culture than maybe even the Netherlands, even though we are part of the kingdom. So that's a little bit of our context. We are not a center. We do not provide direct services, but we do capacity building for professionals that work with people on the spectrum. So teachers, healthcare providers, also caregivers, that is our focus. And linking them, if anything, to other organizations that will help them provide better services. So we decided to figure out what was going on in Aruba. When I became president, I like data. I come from that bubble, so I wanted to see before we continue on campaigns and figuring out what we should and shouldn't do, we need to know what is currently going on. And we found out that the Aruban population didn't know how to interact with autistic people. So that was very interesting because how are we going to make that happen, right? When we talk about inclusion, which I think is very important for me, but of course for the movement as well, we need to bridge those gaps. People need to know how to, right? But we did an investigation, and we did this with my alma mater. So I graduated from Coastal Carolina University. I got 2 students from the public health department to come to Aruba and do an investigation and kind of figure out what are people thinking and what do we need. And this was really fun and interesting. So, it was very obviously statistical methods. We found out what our population size would need to be, but we also wanted it to truly be representative because we knew we wanted to use that to lobby for systematic change, right? So our students went to different districts on the island. They were at grocery stores, right, trying to get enough respondents from each district to make sure that it is representative of our island. Aruba is small, so we could do that in a couple of weeks. And it was 10 questions. We wanted it to be benchmarked with something else, and the questions were based on overall knowledge about diagnosis and characteristics of autism, but we also wanted to know what it meant in regards to services, if people knew about that, and so services and treatments, but also interaction and communication. And it was 18 plus, and then we found out what we found out, and from there we created a plan to better use our efforts and resources to create the change that we wanted to see. And what we found out was that even though all of the other results were very positive, about 94.47% of the people that responded said that they did not know how to interact with autistic children. And that was very interesting because even though the organization had worked so hard on creating, basic awareness of autism, what is autism, how it's diagnosed, and what does it mean, for people, we had not done a good job at what does that mean for inclusion and interaction, right? So we knew we need to do something about that. So we created a plan, and in our plan, again, we saw that we did not have to spend as much time explaining what autism is and is not, because that was already good. Of course, you need to continue to repeat that, but not as much. We found out that people, although they may know the limitations, um, and they know they have some challenges, again, how do we better those things? And we needed to work on 3 specific areas because we thought those were the areas that were mostly impacted, which were in the public, right? Our basic community, the workplace, and school settings. And that is when we decided that we were gonna do this through the increase of visibility to support and kind of encourage people to enact change. And that is how we decided to change the narrative and the rhetoric around autism on our island. And that meant, shaking some people up, right? But also moving from what I would consider a little negative tone, when we talk about conditions being sad and very challenging, and moving towards it's very diverse and it looks very different for each family and each person, and let's focus on what it means for each individual, what they would need. And you might find out that for some people, for them to be integrated in community, it might not mean needing much, right? So for this, we created a plan, and it was a 5-year plan. And we focused on these pillars. We wanted a person-led approach. We wanted an ambassadors program. We wanted to get into mainstream media. So we decided, where can we put in funds and that we are in control of. So we produced a podcast and a radio show. We wanted to increase our lobbying efforts and eventually get to the United Nations. So I'll tell you a little bit about how all of those things went, because it's been almost 5 years now. So a person-led approach, we have heard that in the neurodiversity movement, right, a lot, that, and it is part of the global autism slogan as well, do with, not for, right? So we wanted to identify people in our community who are willing to commit to the organization and work on these things. And we found these people, and then we created an ambassadors program. So together with a social worker, we basically mentored 2 autistic young adults into becoming ambassadors for the foundation. And it is a very high commitment, because that meant going to interviews with us, that meant sitting in meetings to kind of figure out the projects and plans that we were working on. And we also had young adults who were like consultants, as you may call it. And although they are not ready, or they do not feel that they can commit to become an ambassador, they still weigh in decisions that we make and plans that we make for awareness campaigns or even capacity building. And then it was getting into mainstream media. So Aruba is small, so everybody knows somebody who has something or has a family, etc. And we kind of worked on that, right? So we found who our friends were in mainstream media, and started showing up to interviews with our ambassadors. So at the beginning, it was very challenging. We went from people in radio interviews very bluntly asking our female ambassador if she could ever have babies. We went from that to now we are having full-on conversations about projects that she's working on, and how she uses art to advocate for needs. So it was hard, and although we tried to prepare our ambassadors for these type of comments, of course, we expect the best because we are in this bubble and we want to think that people may not hold these stigmas and myths around autism. But we found that, okay, how are we going to tackle these things in mainstream media? So it was challenge them as they came, right? Live on air if it was on the radio, live on air on TV, but in a respectful manner, of course, but using the opportunity to educate, which culturally was a little confronting too, because in our culture, we are very collectivist and we have a high power distance. So in situations like that, in the past, people tended to move away from that question and kind of just talk about something else. And we wanted to say, no, we're going to use the moment to educate. And then we also found really good friends. So one of the main local channels really decided that they're going to support us. So they give us space at all times. They don't charge us for this. To educate the community, we also found partners in production companies who were able to produce a podcast. And now we have a radio show in our local radio station, a very popular one, where we had the first program that is hosted by an autistic person. So that was really nice, but we needed them obviously to believe, and it took a little time before we got people to that point. So yeah, so as I already mentioned, the person that approach, we also wanted to focus on real people and real problems. And not saying that some people are not real or their problems are not real, but we live in a globalized world, and as a small island, we might see a lot of information and things coming from, mainstream media from the US or from other countries that might not necessarily in any way relate to our situation. As already mentioned, we have a pretty good, robust social system. We have universal health care. We have, education for all. So there were things that people were maybe thinking was an issue, and after we did some investigation, it wasn't as big of an issue. So it was also focusing on that, what is our current situation in Aruba? What are our challenges here, and how can we address them? And that meant talking to real people with real problems, talking to educators. What are you truly struggling with? What do you need help with? Before we, got a program from either the Netherlands or the US or Latin America and just, adapted it or whatever to Aruba. And it meant talking to parents, but also talking to young adults. What are things that you went through as you are transitioning from school to work life? What are the challenges that you are facing? What does it mean on, the basis of legislation? Are we missing protections? So it was a lot of grounding work for us as well, and making sure that we are informing in a way that is real to our specific situation. And of course, we needed to bridge gaps, communication gaps between our stakeholders, and person-led approaches also helped with that. We found that it had a higher impact when ambassadors explained their own situations to stakeholders rather than having any of us from the board, for example, trying to explain something that we may not able to relate to even. And in our ambassadors program, that meant also identifying community leaders, right? People that we felt were already active in this field, but that were also willing to commit, that have families that were willing to commit if they were not fully independent. That was very important. But also providing spaces and resources. So truly allowing them to develop that skill of becoming ambassadors, of becoming better speakers. That meant, investing in, for example, the production of the podcast. It meant in investing in whatever resources they told us that they would need to succeed in their project. And this is a picture from this April where we were able to speak at the United Nations with our ambassadors. It was a very nice moment for me, for sure, after seeing that plan kind of walk out, but also showing other possible future ambassadors that this is as far, that you can go, and even further if you want to, of course, if you commit to something like this. They didn't become ambassadors yesterday and ended up in the United Nations. This has been years in the working, about 3 years of very close mentorship and exposure into the media for us to get here, for us to be aligned with a message and an issue or a couple of issues that we wanted to bring to the UN and to WHO, who was also there. And as I mentioned, right, for the mainstream media, so that's Kay and Byron, and they're both our ambassadors. It was helping them out with anything and everything, figuring out what the topics might be that we want to discuss, ask them what are things that they might be struggling with, but also teaching them to listen to the community, because sometimes, educators or healthcare providers or parents might be signaling that they need information on something. So our show is an informational show. So also learning that listening part of what do people need to be able to provide you better education, to provide you better services. So that has also been part of that. So not only using that space to kind of express what they might be going through and feeling, but also as a space to listen and to reciprocate those needs as well. And here's an example of one of our supporters, and she works for the local TV channel. And, it's, again, focusing on abilities. Everybody kind of figured out what their limitations were, what topics we talk and don't talk about. I try to avoid conversations around education because I'm not an educator, right? But we also teach that and learn that from each other, and finding the things that our ambassadors might be interested in talking about, and where I might chime in, and sometimes I don't chime in at all because it's not necessary. So it's really a partnership of trusting, but also showing how trust can look like for the betterment of things. So we increased our lobbying efforts as well, and we focus on a person-led approach. So anytime that we would lobby for something, we would have our ambassadors with us, and our ambassadors also include parents. So depending on the topics that we were going to discuss, we bring Kay and Byron and parents, or sometimes just Kay and Byron, or just parents, depending on what we wanted to do. But we also focus a lot on being culturally sensitive. So not just taking messaging again from abroad, but actually focusing on what does this mean for us in our particular situation. And when we talk about our advocacy work, again, it's an inclusive approach, but constantly acknowledging progress too, because it is very important not to focus only on what we still need, but also acknowledging that these efforts do pay off, because that way people feel more inclined to buy into your efforts. So these are some pictures of things that we have done. So pictures in Parliament. That was a couple of years ago when we began with the ambassador program, and this picture is from this year, where we got the mandate that the Autism Foundation is the chairperson of the National Autism Committee. So it is a process, and I think it's important to showcase that, but it's consistent. And the model kind of stayed the same, right? So we didn't move away from, okay, maybe if I do the whole talking, it's going to be faster or more efficient. No, it's a process, and it's finding the strength in everyone in your team. That is a picture after we implemented the National Early Intervention Program in Aruba. Again, it took years, right? It took lobbying with the right people. It took effort on policy level with the right people, and as well as in the private sector. So even if we don't have a mandate for like hotels, we did find partners in the hospitality industry, which is the biggest industry on our island, to see how they can focus on inclusion in their business model. And again, this is done because they see the progress that is being done in the public sector, and they want to be front runners in the private sector. So it's also finding those partners and making sure that you run with it, right? and that they become examples for your community as well. Of course, we had lessons learned. It was very important to find the line between positive and negative messaging, right? Something that we might seem as positive, somebody else might not see as positive. So it's constantly finding out when and where it works, with whom you're going to talk, in which tone, and which rhetoric you're going to use in each area, in each space, in each conversation that you are in. We found that consistency is key. Anytime that we took a little longer breaks than we wanted to or than we had planned, we saw that the startup after that meant a lot more effort. So then focusing on how can we stay consistent even in, the little breaks and the downtimes. Commitment retention is hard. It's having people who show up constantly. So that meant people in our board, but also our ambassadors, the families that we consult with, the people that we consult with. We have to find ways to retain that commitment. And in the world of public policy, that might be a little hard because things move a little slow. But it's finding that and having meetings continuously, having moments to check in, even if progress is small or even if progress is not where you would want it to be, making sure that we maintain that. And that we have to challenge stigmas and myths at all times, even when it's uncomfortable. We have learned that, because it is cultural, when you're sitting across parliament members or ministers and they say something, that maybe we had previously explained, or maybe something that is not correct, be it in terms or be it in the data, it's also challenging that and being sure that we have become, an authority through experience and through knowledge, and standing our ground as well. In a respectful manner, of course, but we have seen the positive impact that has had when you position yourself as such. So if anything, I have heard different people here in different countries saying that they would want more. And I, by all means, do not expect that the case is the same. Aruba is small. It's easier for us to reach to our government. But I do encourage you to take the steps to, just lobby for public policy if that is what you think will make that effective change as you continue with your other work, because you can't just stop one or the other, but do it. And start today if you can, because the longer you wait to start, the longer it's going to take to get it done. So that is what I wanted to share about our program. I don't know if you have any questions, but thank you so much to listening to this presentation.
Any questions? Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. So next, we're going to take a pause.
Thank you.